there's a whole layer of work beneath your expertise and your knowledge that you could more than likely outsource. You really have to decipher what is your time worth.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Staying Power Podcast. Today, Brandon Hall and I are joined by Matt Ryan, who has over 10 years experience in real estate and construction. Matt founded his company, re-viv, to re-engineer residential and commercial real estate in underserved communities. In this episode, we discuss some of the struggles and lessons Matt learned along his entrepreneurial journey, including how ego can get in the way of success, time management and delegation, documenting processes and procedures, and the importance of an outbound recruiting process, and much more.
Hey, Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Would you be able to give our listeners a little information on your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in construction in the little known field of energy efficiency back in 2010. Stephen Chu got brought on Secretary of Energy under Obama. They saw energy efficiency in commercial buildings and residential buildings as really an industry that was going to rival solar. And, I was basically moving out of my family's business at the time, looking for something to do, and there was literally no jobs. I'd come from advertising and marketing. And at the time, energy efficiency was it seemed like a blossoming industry. So I dove headfirst into that. Worked it in the Southeast where I was from. I moved up from South Carolina to Charlotte, North Carolina, and really cut my teeth as a subcontractor, working in everything from, certifying new tract homes under Energy Star certification to, diagnosing and troubleshooting these comfort and air quality and moisture problems in residential buildings, which evolved into multifamily construction and renovation. And with a focus again on energy efficiency, comfort, again, just kind of expanding in every direction we possibly could. I ended up with a business partner of mine in Hilton Head, Jamie Kay. We were just kind of tag teaming the industry, finding ways to make money. After about 5 years, I said, you know what, this is going a direction I'm not sure. Let me see where this industry is really going. The tax incentives, some of the studies that we had done for utilities and nonprofits, that money was running dry. The future of the industry was looking a little shaky, and solar was really, really taking off. And it was about that time that I came to San Francisco and actually spoke with someone here in the Bay Area who tried to grow and scale a company and actually got venture capital funding to do so in that industry, in energy efficiency. And after kind of looking at the lay of the land, I said, I don't know this is for me. And I know at that time I had bought my first real estate investment back in 2013, and I'd kind of house hacked up until then. Always housing was cheap enough where I lived, where it was easy to buy a house, right? And then bring on a roommate and all that stuff. And I said, real estate's really interested me for a long time. Let me start diving into it. And moving into San Francisco at the time, which I ultimately chose to do, I was kind of at the epicenter of this very intense, real estate housing shortage, and, the policy aspect of it, kind of the urban planning aspect of it all interested me. And at the end of the day, re-viv was really, kind of the cusp of it all. And really went back to an experience that I had with a community member where I bought my first investment property, this Pam. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, it's a quick story. I sold my property back in 2013 and dove really headfirst into real estate in 2015, and ultimately, took about 6 to 8 months off and started re-viv in 2016. So been doing that ever since.
So could you just be able to tell us about why you chose to start re-viv and a little bit about what it does, and how did you know it's the right time to start that company?
Yeah, I mean, two really good questions. For me, in my first investment property, we befriended a local community member who actually helped babysit my stepdaughter at the time. And ultimately what we ended up coming across was Miss Pam was this, African-American woman. She was a grandmother, took care of her grandchild, walked to the school that she worked at, that my now daughter went to, took a bus to her second job. She was an up-and-coming neighborhood. And so my wife and I are out on the patio. She actually lived in my first investment property. And we're having this conversation. We're like, hey, as more investors move in to this neighborhood, what's going to happen to the Miss Pams? That was kind of the genesis of this larger issue of gentrification and private investment and value add investing, and how essentially, there's kind of these market forces coming into these neighborhoods, and it's ultimately having a negative effect on some people's lives. And that's the best way that I can kind of, put the problem in context. And that, quite frankly, that was it for me. I drafted a 2-pager of what the problem was and how I thought we could start to, work on it, so to speak, and took it to a local real estate developer. And he was like, this is a fabulous idea, but you need to find a way to balance what you're trying to do with solid returns. That's what real estate investors ultimately care about. And that's really, I've been trying to align those two interests ever since I started with Revive. And as far as, what kind of provoked me, pushed me, I would say the background that I had in construction, I had all this knowledge in construction, this expertise. I'm like, where can I best parlay this? And as a subcontractor, you always become a little bit hypercritical of developers and builders, and you always kind of think you can do it better, right? And so for me especially, it's kind of like, well, I've been kind of complaining about the way people are doing things. Like, if I think I can do it better, go out and do it. Go out and prove it, right? If you think you can actually build a better product. So I really kind of took that and ran with that ball and just said, let me see what I can do.
Got it. And when you started this, was it a solo effort, or you have partners, or did you start with any employees? Like, can you just go through that a little bit?
Yeah. It's, and this will dovetail into our conversation nicely. It was just me, man. I mean, I hired a virtual assistant off of Upwork. I mapped together what I thought was a business plan at the time. And I just started kind of running in the direction, and frankly, that's always kind of been my MO. I could definitely have put together some grandiose plans. I was obviously a lot more sophisticated in the way that I had done it the first time in 2009 and 2010. But yeah, it was just kind of like, here's the basics of what I need. I need to go source properties. Here's the market. I had a family friend who was basically going to potentially help me on the equity side. I just had these bits and pieces, and I just said, I'm just going to run with it, and I'm just going to start dialing people. And quite frankly, that's kind of how I started my first business. I just picked up the phone and, started cold calling on potential clients, which in this case was potential property owners, who may or may not sell us our apartment building, and just kind of building a framework around that.
Got it. And I remember, from what Brandon had told me around your initial conversations about this episode, was that one of your biggest challenges were time management, and how it took you almost 10 years to prove all the experts are right. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that challenge and what insights you were able to gain from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to really like in the heat of my contractor days, right? Where literally I'm the only breadwinner. I'm the guy going out in the field, kind of earning money, billing hours in the field, but at the same time trying to go into the back office and scale this business, trying to find a way to get out from underneath it. And, the way that I kind of put this into context when we were talking about this podcast, I was like, I have the 10 years of proving the experts right. Well, I always go back to the book I read in the heat of all that big problem, that I had, where it's like, how do I get out from this business? It's literally stacked on my shoulders. It was the E-Myth book. And if anyone's ever read it, it's like one of the most obvious, just simple books, right? But it didn't stick. it didn't, it's kind of like, it took me a really long time, and getting further along and like this constant failure, really realizing that, like, we all do maybe one, maybe two good things really well, and I think the problem that we all have is when we're trying to start a business, in software and tech has made this a little bit easier, but it's kind of like we all want to go towards doing everything. And that's what, and your ego kind of tells you that too. Your ego is like, oh, like, you hire someone to do something, they don't do it nearly as good as you wanted them to. And you're like, I hired this person, what, I can do it better. And, it's really important as I've gotten older that the biggest lesson that I've learned is to get out of the way. Like, you're more often than not, especially if you're moving towards profitability or you're generating revenue and you're starting to feel some momentum in your business, I call it from the infancy to kind of the toddler stage, is you're becoming the problem, because inevitably you're the backlog for a lot of the potential growth as well. And you're really trying to manage so many different things. I mean, this depends on your industry too, but you're really trying to manage so many different things that you can't truly be effective, and that was like I said, it was like a 10-year lesson for me of just kind of getting to it and finally realizing, okay, I'm back in the same place again. Like, who's the problem? I'm kind of the problem. And I think it's a really important lesson for entrepreneurs to realize, especially if you're, literally taking a conceptual idea and putting it into action. If you're buying a franchise or you're taking over a business, or maybe you have a specific software that you're developing. Maybe it's a little bit different, but eventually I think everyone inevitably runs into these problems and has to face them.
How do you know if you're the best person for a particular job though? You know, I think that's something that is tough to figure out, especially as you scale a business up, because like you're right, at the beginning, you're doing everything and you're not effective at really anything. But as you continue to scale a business, you know, like what if you are the best tax preparer in the world? And you know, though, that preparing taxes over and over and over is not going to scale the business. How do you reconcile the fact that you're going to have to get somebody in there that's not as good as you so that you can go do something that you're probably not that great at, but you know has to happen to build the business? Right. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I
feel like that's my life.
Let me take your example of the best tax CPA, right? And first of all, to answer your question, how do you know what your skills are? There's a million different personality tests and skills tests out there. And I mean, I've taken, I feel like them all. And it's really, I had a business coach that we did some together. Pick one or two, right? And nail that down. And not only that, but like, think about what you do on a daily basis. And you really feel like, A, you're truly productive in that activity. And B, you're drawn to it. Because we all have things, especially as a business owner, that we're drawn to and that you're like, hey, I'm excited to do this. And then you turn around to the other task and you're like, oh my God, I would rather, just stab my eyes out with a pin than be doing this right now, right? And so think about those things, because really, if you're into it, then that's what you're constantly drawn to it. It's more than likely a skill set for you. Okay. So let's take the tax example. So you're really good at preparing taxes, right? But going out and getting the business, right? Finding people who you can do the taxes, having phone calls, setting up those phone calls. Once you actually obtain that client, how they get you their information, where does it go? How is it filed? Is there supplementary bookkeeping that needs to be done before you're going in and doing, say, the account reconciliation and looking to see is all these things done, right? There's a whole layer of work beneath your expertise and your knowledge that you could more than likely outsource for $25, $35 an hour. And if you're billing 85 or 95 or less, right, then you got to kind of move that sliding scale. And I think that's the other key thing too, is you really have to decipher what is your time worth, right? And I think those are kind of the key things for me, that it's like finding out all those activities that maybe you're not good at, that you're struggling with. And also that delta between, okay, is this kind of a systematic piece that can be McDonaldized and that I can outsource to someone for a cheaper dollar amount than what I'm actually getting paid?
So you figure out what you're really good at, and then you aggressively, or as aggressively as your budget will allow, I assume, you aggressively get rid of everything else. You try to put really great people in place. Is that kind of the fundamentals of great time management?
I would say so, yes. And, it's when you say great people, right, that's the intent. But the execution of that is the other big piece of the pie, right? Like that.
Well, now we're talking about it. I don't want to have to execute. I want to hire the person that executes.
Yeah. If only, I think there's a button on Upwork and it's hire qualified individual, and you press it and boom, they come out. It's like a genie. Yeah. I mean, and I think when we first talked, that was the other thing, it's like, we're kind of going nicely into this, the ops and admin HR piece, right? Because the one thing that, and if you guys are ready to go there, I'm happy to go there. But if you want to add another topic, let me know, because I'm going to dive right in.
Well, before we do, I've got one more question. I think isn't it Elon Musk or something that outsources his laundry? There's somebody.
That's fantastic.
I used to outsource my laundry too. Hey, wait a second. I used to have the guys down the block do it. Yeah, man. I used to just drop it off when I was in New York City.
Okay, because my next question was going to be, how far do you take this? But clearly, my co-host here has already done all of that. So, what else do you outsource, Tom?
It's funny because whenever I got back, and I'm alone right now, so I have a family of 3 plus a wife, and I came back before they did from visiting family, and I'm looking at like this long list of things like household duties plus this pretty decent list of work items, and I talked to my wife the other day, and I said, I'm so tired of doing all this crap. Like, I'm going to hire a TaskRabbit, and I'm just going to bite the bullet and have someone come to the house and do all this for me. Because, and this is in the middle of like, you have all your concerns about, does this person have COVID? Where have they been? But I'm just kind of to that point where it's like, I don't know. For me, at least, I think when you're redlining and you feel that, that's the time. You know, I don't think it's like you kind of have to be in the right place, but I also would encourage anyone to not get there first, right? You know, just take the things that bother you and are kind of taking your mental capacity and get them off the plate, you know, because if you're an entrepreneur, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of things in a day that can inundate you, you know? And I think that's the key, is just to have that true mental capacity to be able to really execute on the things you need to execute on.
Yeah. Before we move on, I want to add that, you know, one of the things I did when I was living in New York City, I was like, look, I want to focus all my time on stuff that's going to be the most productive use of my time. And I looked at the list of stuff that I'm not that great at, that I don't enjoy doing. One of them was laundry. And I said, you know what, why am I going to spend my time folding this laundry and doing this laundry? I hate this. I'm not that great at it, when I can just go down the block to the guys down the block every 2 weeks and pay them $20. I used to pay them to wash and fold my laundry. And I have to go up and down that block anyway. So it's just more efficient to do that. So I guess, you know, the point I'm trying to make with all this is you got to look at, you know, what's the highest and best use of your time and what is just not worth your time. To me, it wasn't worth it to spend an hour or two every week or every 2 weeks to do my laundry when I can outsource it for $20.
No, absolutely. And you're smarter than me, Thomas, because I actually had to get married to outsource that. And I told my wife, I was like, I'll make you a deal. I will cook because I love to cook. That's like my outlet, right? If you will fold and do my laundry. And that's been agreement has been in stone. Now, it wasn't $20. It hasn't been $20, you know, that bird. Now I'm like, please help me cook, you know, like 2 hours.
You took on an equity partner, man.
No, I know, but I would encourage anyone, you know, unless they're your soulmate and you want to marry them, of course, which is why I married. But yeah, I mean, $20 looks like a much better deal.
You're my soulmate, but there are strings attached.
To me, that was my kryptonite, man. I couldn't do laundry. I'm like, I'm over this. And she used to joke with me because my pile of laundry, when she would come and visit me, we did a long distance thing for a while, I would have clean clothes and they would go from my bed to my desk, to my bed to my, and it was madness, you know?
Yeah. You know, I laugh at Tom outsourcing his laundry, but man, that would be amazing. I need to outsource my laundry. I need to also outsource my dishes. I hate dishes. Cannot stand them. Just cannot stand them. Yet they pile up every single day. But no, so it's kind of like talking about your wife saying, you know, I'm going to get TaskRabbit and just outsource all that stuff. My wife did something similar recently. We hired a babysitter, but to Tom's point, it was just I can get 4 hours of my week back for $100 and whatever dollars it is to get a babysitter. And I can go and she has a flower pressing business. So if anybody is out there is getting married, go check out Bonnie's Blooms. She presses flowers and preserves them for you forever. But anyway, so she does that. And so she's like, yeah, I can sell 2 frames extra a month at a bare minimum and break even on this and get 4 hours of my time back where I can focus. And which I thought was really cool, but it doesn't always have to be monetary, right? I mean, we're talking about doing laundry and just, you know, tasks that we hate. It could just be a mental break, you know? And that's something that I've kind of come to realize, because kind of switching back to the monetary piece, as I've scaled the real estate CPA out, we're at 15 employees now. We're in the process of hiring 3 to 4 more here within the next 2 months. And I always, exactly to what you were saying, Matthew, my gut check was always the redlining. It was, if I am getting redlined here, or if I feel like anybody on my team is getting redlined, then we're going to hire. And it worked really well, but it wasn't great. And the reason that it wasn't great is because you're redlining because you're already at max capacity. Yeah. You should have hired that person a couple months ago to help support so that you can continue scaling and growing into that. And that's kind of what we realized, but we've never really had the capital to, you know, take the risk to pre-hire somebody when you don't really need them yet. And it's something that I've been working on with my coach in 2020 here, is just hey, we now have the capital, we have the cash flow to hire 3 people at one time. Even though we don't need all 3 of them today, we know that within the next 6 months we will. And so now we're kind of getting ahead of that redlining. And it's a weird, I was telling Tom the other day, it's a very weird mental shift for me, because at the beginning of running this business, or really up until this point, I could always go into a spreadsheet, see all of our projects, see who we had on staff, and see exactly who we needed to hire. And now I'm like looking at all these projects, looking who we have, and I'm going +3 people. And I'm like, well, am I going to lose money on this? I mean, I know I'm not going to lose
Right.
money. It's going to take 6 months, but it's just a weird thing, So it's really weird.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I had to nail that down, doesn't it kind of feel like it's your ego letting go of it a little bit?
Yeah. The business is starting to stand up into its own thing at this point.
Yep.
And it's me kind of stepping away a little bit and saying, I don't actually, I need to be the one that says, yeah, we need to do this. And I need to be the one that recognizes, yeah, we need to do this. But the business is kind of telling me now what it needs way in advance of me figuring that out for myself, if that makes sense. But you figure it out just by talking to all your people, right? And looking at the growth and looking at what we expect to continue doing. But yeah, just kind of like taking a step back and looking at this thing that we've created and realizing that, hey, if we want to continue growing it, we have to feed it, and we have to feed it a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's two things to that I would add. The first is that, this idea of working in your business versus on your business, you had to have been, quote, working on your business in order to have that premonition, right? And that doesn't have to be anything super technical. It could be like, I'm going to carve an hour out to just sit here and stew on my business, think about things, where I'm at mentally, the problems that I had this past week, whatever it may be, right? So you can start to get ahead of those things. For me, I've always been a very forward thinker. Like, that's not a problem for me. I'm more the data, like staying focused in here. And the second thing is really finding that balance. I see it a lot in venture capital here with the startup space in San Francisco. People just burning through money. I mean, ripping through money, staffing up, and just hiring more people than maybe that they need. And then there's kind of this big slice and dice. And it seems like an inherently inefficient system. But then you come to the other polar opposite of that, where you and I are at, where it's like, okay, I've got a little bit of cash. Now I'm going to hire, incrementally do these things. And of course, right, in a perfect world, we want to find that happy median, and I think, again, the only way to have the happy median, if you're on the side that we're on, is you really got to take the time to think about where you're headed and what the next 6 to 9, 12 months look like for you. Otherwise, you're not going to see that thing coming, and then it hits you. And like you said, that red line, it makes it really difficult to have the capacity to commit. And I think that's the key thing, is the commitment. It's not just like, am I going to do this or am I going to try this? It's like, am I committed to making sure that this happens?
Well, and now that we're kind of past this, we can only hire when we're redlining phase. Now we're actually finding that we can spend more time on the training. So people used to take 4, 5, 6 months to fully get up to speed here. And so now we're asking questions in terms of, can we get somebody ready to rock and roll within 2 months? What does that look like? Well, it looks like very dedicated training and very, very intentional onboarding. But it is because now we've kind of scaled to a point where no one individual person should be redlining all the time. They should be able to pass the work to somebody else to free up and reallocate their time as needed. You mentioned some of the tech firms, and this is actually something that I just recently talked about with my team, is that the tech firms, they do a great job at raising a lot of capital, and that allows them to hire a lot of people. Now, they lose money from an operating perspective all the time.
Yeah.
But what's going on is they're creating a great product, and in some cases, ideally most cases, but in some cases they're creating a great product, but then they have the team to support the customer acquisition and support the customer experience. The customers all talk about how amazing the product is, and they just experience this exponential growth, and eventually they reach profitability. But with professional services firms, such as like a CPA firm like ourselves, we only hire when we have the incremental cash flow to hire. And it took me kind of realizing this to also realize we need to hire 3 more people now, not just 1 more person. Yeah. I need to hire 3 more people to take a load off of my team, to train these 3 additional people for 6 months way before next tax season, and to provide now, if everybody's got a little bit less work, they have more time to spend on client experience. Client experience is going to increase. If that means I drop my margin by 5%, I'm fine with that, because I know that it's going to come back to me over time with clients talking about how amazing we are. But that just takes capital injection. So it's just a matter of saying, I'm okay dropping my margin so that I can inject capital into the business to hire the people that we don't necessarily need today, but we will in 6 months. And I'd rather be prepared for that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would differentiate between, what is human capital, right? What is your time? What is your energy and your ability? Because when it comes to recruitment and HR, you should be able to nail that, right? As a business owner, like, there's technicalities of it, and that maybe you're not up to verse on, but understanding what a clear vision is, what you need to accomplish, and being able to decipher that and train someone, ultimately, you should be able to kind of knock that out of the park, right? And so that time and energy, that may not cost you, there's opportunity costs associated with it, right? Or if you don't have the opportunity to have like an ops manager or someone who's helping you with the hiring process, or an HR firm, so it's like you've got the capital to actually go out and spend to do it. And then you've got your time and your energy too. And I think that's kind of the other thing you have to take into consideration is like, where am I on both of those spectrums, both monetarily and like my human capital, my redlining, my time, my energy? Because, one of the biggest mistakes that I made for a really, really long time until I had a strong ops manager who was helping me with the HR process and really diving deep is I would warm body hire. It's like, oh, we just got to get someone in. Let's, throw them into the shipping sink or into the sinking ship and hope that they know how to swim, right? And it's like, no one wants to walk into your problems and have that be their job, right? Like no one wants that, and it's difficult when you're redlining to really see that and understand that, like, not only am I not focused on getting the right person with the right skill set, but you mentioned it, the T word, training. Like, how much time am I genuinely dedicating to making sure that this person is set up for success? Or am I just getting them on and then piling all the problems that I've had for the last 60, 90 days, the pissed off customers, all the marketing that we've forgotten to do, so on and so forth, and saying, oh, here, take this from me, please. And then wondering why things don't work out. And I think that's, especially for those who are self-funding, that's the kiss of death.
In some of the conversations you had before this podcast, you said that operations and HR was some of the weak links in early startup organizations. So what kind of approach do you take to recruitment? How do you recruit in your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think you've got two elements now to modern day work, right? And this has really been going to be extremely relevant for COVID, right? You have your contract workers, remote workers who maybe aren't a part of your core team, but still have an integral element, right? So for us, that's Upwork, it's mainly Upwork, quite frankly. We use the platform a lot. We spend a lot of money on the platform, but the ways that we've done it have changed, right? So where we would normally kind of do these preliminary interviews with people, go over the skill, the job description, blah, 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 or the project scope. And then we would kind of have this very intensive onboarding system, where we kind of try to bring everyone up to speed and blah, blah, blah. We've realized that we end up burning a lot of time on remote contractors who ultimately very quickly show that they can't fulfill the job description, or their communication skills are not great, and so really what we've kind of do is we've pulled back on that a little bit. Instead of kind of just, giving them the garden hose, we started to bite it off in little smaller chunks. And, the other big mistake we were doing is we were bringing people, I'm going to probably get in trouble if I say this, but we were bringing people off the platform and paying them on our own. And that was a big issue, because we found that when we did that, a lot of times people were not fulfilling their duties, and we couldn't leave them a bad review or say, hey, this person totally jetted on us. And so we've started doing just very small, like bite-sized chunks. So we'll assign them a portion of a larger project that we're trying to do. We'll still get them up to speed. We have process documents. We never hire anyone without a thorough, detailed process document of what needs to be done, and at least an outlay of like what the step-by-step instructions are. So you're getting an instructional manual from day one. And I would say of all the remote contractors that have come and gone, there's rarely ever been an instance where someone's been like, they're completely disorganized and I had no idea what I needed, right? I don't know that anyone's ever accused us of that. Maybe been a little bit demanding, or, hey, didn't like this person, didn't like re-viv and what they were doing, but never been for a lack of organization. I think that's really fundamentally, you have to get there, because even if this person doesn't work out, what are you going to improve upon in the next hire, right? What are you going to add to? Like, how are you going to make it easier for the next person to understand and communicate with them what you want and what you expect if you're not putting it in writing? So that was kind of like those are kind of where we're at with the remote workers. The other side is we just started looking on for like full-time employees, like true. And we were even looking at giving people a chunk of equity, because in my space, in the private equity world, you're typically working with very small staffs because you have a lot of vendors. We work with property managers, lenders, a full breadth of attorneys. We have a lot of kind of people that are part of our team, but not W-2 employees, right? And for the W-2 employees, it was a completely different process. For one, I read the Who book, which is a great book on executive level searches. Even if you're kind of looking for a partner and you're a VC, or maybe you're starting a business and you're looking for some key elements of people, key ingredients of what you're looking for in a team member, I would highly recommend the book. And it just kind of gave a format for us. And it was a lot more detailed than anything we've ever done. And it actually helped us with our remote contracting work. And the way that it did that is it puts you in a much more stringent interview process. And it's not like your atypical process. You're getting into very specific, talk to me about, your performance, talk to me about what your bosses would say about you. And I won't give up too many details. I don't want to just give the details of the book out. I want to just tease a little bit because it is a good one. You're really kind of getting into someone's work history and letting them explain it to you. And probably the biggest thing that I took about the book was that too often, and I made this for the last 8 to 9 years as an entrepreneur, I was extremely guilty of this. You get into an interview and you're so excited about telling a person about the job and what you're trying to do that you end up talking a lot. And I would say we were conducting 1.5 hour long, sometimes 2 hour long interviews where we're maybe spending no more than 10 to 15 minutes talking, me specifically talking to the candidate. And I mean, it's interesting to me how when you're getting to that level of detail and getting some, you hear it all the time, like, get someone talking, right? But getting them talking about their work history, how much detail people are willing to divulge. And I think that's the really interesting thing and what I took from it was we really had a strong representation of what someone's skill sets were. And we put it into a long formatted sheet where we would score them. And when we got off with our interviews, there's like 4 rounds of interviews that you go through in this process for an executive level search. If after the second interview, if we were, 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points that we couldn't score someone on, we wouldn't just chalk it up and give them a score for that section. We would go back and conduct a second interview, a third interview with that person of the total, and we would cover all those specific elements. And then we would kind of move into some situational stuff. And I mean, it was mind blowing how much different the process felt and how much that changed our remote working process, where we're now getting very detailed into what people's skill sets and what their performance was, not just what are the roles, the responsibilities, what are the duties, what's the blocking and tackling, right? You're really understanding what someone's aspirations are for their career, how it aligns with their skills, and then how what you're offering aligns and backs into that skill set. And after that, it makes it a really, really easy yes or no.
What you described about the getting really excited to talk about the position and the company, I fall into that trap all the time. So help me not fall into that trap. What interview questions should I be asking? And this is super relevant because when we hang this podcast up, I'm going to go interview somebody. So what do I need to be asking here? How do you have a 2 hour long interview? What are those detailed? I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you,
So
tell me what I need to ask.
The Who book is great. And I can't tell you the exact specific questions because, there's 4 basics, but you ask these 4 basic questions. If I had to do them off the top of my head, I would butcher them. So you got to go in the Who book and research this. This is your homework for you.
Fair.
But essentially what you end up doing, Brandon, is you end up going through their entire work history, right? So job by job on their resume, you just use that. And you say, starting chronologically from when you graduated college, talk to me. I think I'll give you some quick hints. It's, basically, how did you get hired? What were your responsibilities? What was like your best accomplishment? What was like the worst thing that happened to you kind of thing, right? And just those 4 questions, if you're going chronologically with someone, unless they've got 4 to 5 years experience, it's going to take about 1.5 hours. And that's it. I mean, you obviously are going into more detail, but those conversation pieces begin to open up the window of opportunity for other questions. And not only does it open up the opportunity, but it gets you kind of tuned into, how people think about those jobs and what experiences they had. My favorite time period to discuss with people is if they had worked through the 2009, 2010 recession, right? And if someone was like very quick to skim over that, I'm like, no, let's go back to this. And some people are like, oh man, that was a nightmare. Or, hey, I really had to, and you, all of a sudden you're understanding the turmoil that people went through and how they overcame. And I mean, there's no greater insight in an interview than hearing about something like that, right? Something that's like deeply personal that happened to someone and how they were able to overcome it. And it's like, those were the type of things that we got into that really, quite frankly, made it easy.
How do you determine culture fit, like when we're going through the interviews, all that's great to go through the work history, and all that is great, by the way. And I wrote all that down, so I'm going to use that here in like 30 minutes. But so you got the person, you're interviewing them, you go through the work history, you think that they're a good fit technically, and they've got some good experience. But how do you determine if they're a good fit for the culture that you're trying to build, if they fit well with your values?
Yeah, that's a great one. And it's a great one because my ops manager was actually pressuring me pretty hard on this before we were getting ready to onboard this first big kind of C-level hire. And we were having difficulties deciphering, well, what is our culture, right? And I think when you're first starting and you're still a small group, it's easier because it's really just about, well, what's your personality? What are the types of people that you get along with? And if this person is going to be interacting with, say, you as a CEO a lot, then what are your characteristics? What are the characteristics of the people that you get along with, right? And I mean, it's some people would say, oh, you shouldn't just look for people who are like you. It's not always people that are like you. I mean, we more or less spent more time about how do my ops manager and I communicate. We're very frank. We're very direct. We don't beat around the bush. She's British. I have Midwestern parents. It's just like, there's not a lot of sugarcoating that happens, right? We move very quickly. We don't, we take an idea and we run with it, but we're also very methodical that once we dive into something, we're very detail oriented. So culture fit is kind of, I think it's been built up to be this tech company, like free frappuccinos and, beanbags bullshit. But I think it's a simple matter of what's your chemistry like with that individual? If you're going to really spend time with this person on a daily basis, like, is there initial chemistry, or they just feel like someone who has the right skill sets? I think that's really important. And secondly, like, do you guys fit? Do they fit with kind of what your existing culture is? And just use a couple adjectives to describe whatever your culture is, and then see if they fit into that. And sometimes, the third kind of intangible is, okay, like, we know who I am. Like I said, I'm the big dreamer. I like big ideas. It's taken me a long time to really hone in on the day-to-day and the systematic. I want a doer, right? I'm a thinker. I needed a doer into this particular job. And that's a simple one, identify, again, know who you are as a person, as a CEO, as a business owner, and what your skill sets you lack. And if you're hiring a, key C-level person, you're probably going to need some of those skill sets in that job, right? You're going to need someone who has those skill sets. And I would say that's kind of where you get into hiring the opposite.
I have two questions, two kind of separate tracks. So the first one is, like, in your hiring process, how do you actually source the candidates that you're interviewing? Are you using search firms? Are you using LinkedIn? Are you using Indeed? Are you, going through your network? How do you actually find these people?
Yeah. Again, I'll reference back the Who book. I feel like I'm a poster child for this thing, but 72% of all successful C-level searches, according to Who's research, is done internally. So what does internally mean? It means going out into your network of people and asking for referrals. Okay. I think it was 55 or 66% was done through executive search level firms, which we contacted initially, but A, we didn't have the money, and B, the compensation structure that we had was very non-traditional because we are a startup and we were basically kind of offering stock with no salary, which was a big hurdle to clear. In some companies, that's the way it is. So they wouldn't really touch us. Like, hey, we love what you're doing, but there's no, like, you've got a big hill to climb. So that's where we started. We started with our network of people. We put together a massive distribution list. We very quickly narrowed down and deciphered the two categories of people, like, where are they working now and what are their skill sets? So for us, it was director of acquisitions roles. So it was like brokers in our specific market who have done well in this particular space, or someone who's worked for a private equity acquisition development firm. Very simple, right? And then we just went out and we started farming people on LinkedIn. We started doing cold outreaches, warm outreaches. Hey, we've got a position open. You seem like a good fit. Your skill set definitely matches. And just trying to get conversations started with people. And I would say when it was all said and done, we probably did over 100 to 150 introductions like that, maybe more, and narrowed that down to about under 20 candidates that made the second and third round interviews. So it was wildly successful, but it was gut wrenching. I mean, we were committed to this. My ops manager, another ops assistant, myself, constantly recruiting and interviewing all day long. And even whenever someone wasn't interested, but say they had the skill sets and they were like a really high caliber candidate, it's like, okay, you're not interested, but do you have a friend who might be interested? And, probably 5 or 6 like really good candidates who just didn't work out for whatever the reason, geographically, they weren't in the right place, got referred to us that way, and we're very, very interested in our company and what we were doing, and so it was nothing kind of earth shattering, it was just kind of a grind. It was a sales process, but it was one that I'm glad we took on because we learned a lot about ourselves and how we present our company, which I think is another big thing that a lot of startups make that mistake is like, when you're doing ops and HR and you're recruiting, you're not just trying to hire someone, you're trying to sell someone, right? And like you're risky already, right? You're the riskier pool of jobs out there. And especially now if you're a startup, there's a lot of fear in this marketplace. And I think you have to do a really good job of not just selling the vision of your company, but what's the stability, what's going to happen in 6 months, what's 12 months, how, and I always try to talk to people in that length of time, especially if I'm asking them, which I always ask them, well, what are your goals for the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you legitimately see yourself working? What's your dream job? So on and so forth. And that's even someone all the way down to like an admin assistant, because if they're, say, hey, I want to start my own business in 2 years. Matter of fact, I've already got the framework started. Are you going to hire that person? Probably not. It looks attractive because maybe they're very skilled, but they're always going to be moving towards another destination.
So before I get into a question about ops, just want to ask you another question. So, during the sourcing process, I know you said you use LinkedIn and internal references, and I happen to agree very much with that approach. Happens because I used to be a recruiter, but it is what it is.
Nice.
So have you ever used like Indeed or, Monster or other job posting sites to try to source talent? And if you did, how did that turn out?
Yeah, we did. LinkedIn being one of them, for resumes. And we used a couple other lead listing sites. In my experience, looking historically into other hiring process before we kind of had this, big overhaul and really instituted the Who process, I just didn't see, you spend so much time reviewing resumes, and so much of it's junk. Like so many people they don't listen to the job application. They don't have relevant skill sets. Maybe there's some sort of cross-sectional skill set that they can utilize at your company. So you just spend so much time burning through looking at pieces of paper. Whereas what I liked about LinkedIn, it's like you're looking at someone's work history, kind of a mini resume right there, right? And you're already in your mind saying, I really think this person's a good fit. And we found that more and more. Like we couldn't always put a tangible thing about their LinkedIn profile or what they were doing to it, but we're like, I've got a good feeling about this candidate, and it's just looking at their LinkedIn profile, they seem like a good fit because of X, Y, Z. And the nice thing about that is that we ended up finding more of those true qualified candidates, that legitimately fit this ideal description versus spending time looking at 100 different resumes who maybe 5 or 10 only had that perfect skill set, right? Like the perfect match on the surface.
Okay, I'm sure I could ask you questions about this all day, but I'm gonna trust and rely that the Who book is going to answer a lot of those. Turning to ops real quick,
Can I just jump in about the Indeed thing too, because that's been our experience. So
I want to hear this.
Yeah. So we put out a job posting and we're like, okay, we need a senior tax accountant. And we had, so I sponsored it on Indeed. So I did like, $10 a day or something. And what I did, thanks to Tom here, since Tom's this masterful recruiter, I listened to his advice on where to post the job. So since we're a remote firm, we were like, let's post the job all in the Midwest and everything. And there's great candidates out in the Midwest. We lower our payroll costs. You see a lot of other remote companies do the same thing. They try to get a bunch of these Midwest employees where the cost of living is just way down. So we're like, yep, great idea. So we go and so I post these like 5 different jobs on Indeed. I post one job on LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn you just say remote. We had 370 applications on Indeed within a matter of 2 weeks, and we had 20 on LinkedIn. And the LinkedIn folks were way more accurate than those Indeed ones. Where Indeed, we probably had maybe like 8% of the 300, however many that were actually qualified for an interview, not even necessarily the job, but just an interview. And we had like truck drivers applying. It was wild. And you're right. Yeah. It was just, I got to the point where I just told my wife, I was like, can you just review a batch of 100 of these resumes, look for tax. It has to be public accounting. So look for Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PwC. She's like, I don't really know. And I'm like, hey, you know what? These big four recruiters, they spend 5 seconds looking at a resume. I'm sure it's going to be relatively the same thing. So if you're applying for a job, just know that the boss's wife might be reviewing the resume and she might not have a clue as to what she's actually supposed to be looking for. So make sure that you hit the keywords and you actually apply for the correct position.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. Like the big firms, they don't look at resumes. They have bots crawling these things for keywords and then dumping them and deciphering them, and that's, you hit the nail on the head, man. It's age old sales, right? And with those sites, it's spray and pray. And that's just the way that the recruitment process works in those. And it's unfortunate. I mean, those platforms ultimately own those bad results. That's why LinkedIn's taken off. But it's like anytime you're being more targeted, you're going to be way better off. And I found the same exact thing for us. And that was the same thing with Upwork too. It's like you can very much hone in on specific skill sets that you're looking for.
And I had out of all of those candidates, I had 2 find me on LinkedIn, connect with me and message me and like talk about how thrilled they were for the potential opportunity and like what their background was relative to real estate. And guess what? Both those 2 automatically got interview slots just by taking the extra 5 minutes to do something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Going back to one of the other points you had mentioned before, you said that you and your operations manager, you might come up with an idea, you might act fast on it, but then when you're actually looking to implement that, you're very intentional and deliberate in the way that you process everything out. So how important is that, right? How important is that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll plug this into our weekly, quarterly goal planning, which is the objective key result systems, which I believe is Measure What Matters book, which is another one that I feel like everyone should read. And the way that it kind of works is your objectives, are very high level overarching goals that you want to reach. Sometimes, the big, hairy, audacious goals, to steal a term from Stephen Covey. And then your key results are the blocking and tackling, right? Those are the pieces that are ultimately going to help you get there, where we're going to reach $2 million in sales, but we're going to focus on this many candidates per quarter or month or week or whatever, right? And ultimately, each individual is responsible for a key result, okay? And so that's really been the system that's worked extremely well for us, because when we're looking on a weekly basis at our objective key results, it's a matter of like, oh, okay, let's run off and do this thing. It's like, okay, how does this fit in with one of our other objectives or key results? Okay, it doesn't, or it does. And is this, thing that we want to do maybe more important than an existing key result that we already have in place? So it really becomes a matter of, kind of horse trading. It's not of, because remember, you got a small amount of time, you're limited staff, you're limited monetarily. So every little bit of thing that you take on and you run with, it's an age-old thing where a lot of people just say, oh, we're going to run in this direction. But we've gotten a lot better about being methodical and saying, okay, well, what are we going to remove out of our plate to replace this with? Not what are we going to add? And the OKR system was integral for us, not just only in getting to that point where we're maintaining and figuring out how we're going to prioritize these things, but also seeing, wow, we're not hitting 50% of our key results. Why is that? Well, ultimately, the response was we're understaffed. We don't have the manpower to do it. We don't have the manpower to do half of what we ultimately want to accomplish here. We're only getting to 50% of it. Okay, we got to do 2 things: either get rid of those 50%, shrink it, and focus on that 50%, or hire more people. That's it. And it sounds very, very simple, but I can tell you as an entrepreneur, until I implemented this system, and everyone's got to find a system that works. I'm not saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I really liked it just because of the way that it's structured and the way that it very much hones you in on specific key objectives and builds up to the larger picture and larger goal set. And it made us, again, look at not, okay, we got to go run and do this. It's, what are we going to give up to make time for this? And I think that's a cardinal sin that a lot of entrepreneurs and people make, is they're not looking at all the time and energy they've already spent on things. Like, yeah, you should be nimble, you should adjust, you should try to change on the fly, but take the time to think about if that's the right direction, and is this a 180 degree or is it a 20 to 30 degree turn? And what are you going to lose by moving on to this? And I don't think we look at those things enough. It goes back to taking some time to think about your business, and look at the long term. It's easy to get caught down a rabbit hole. So,
And I guess to follow up to that, when you do choose this idea, right, and you are, to your point, something's got to go to implement something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because, and then on top of that, when you're implementing something new, you have to take into account how it's going to affect the operations of your entire business you're currently doing, right? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that was just, something that I was thinking about. So, we do ask this question to everybody who comes onto the show. And it is, has there ever been a point in along your entrepreneurial journey so far that almost made you quit and say, you know what, this business thing isn't really for me. I'm just going to go back and tuck myself under a nice, secure W-2 job and sail off into the sunset?
Yeah. Weekly, almost monthly. I mean, and I would say for me, I don't know what it was. Re-viv, I finally hit a good just kind of crest. I kind of got over the hump, so to speak. I recently refinanced a property. I've got enough passive income in my business right now that I could stop if I wanted to. And that was a big, big goal for me. So like that was kind of a relief point. But I still every day, I mean, sometimes I just kind of get in that mindset. I'm like, man, like I could have done it this way. I could have done it that way. Or yeah, I mean, it happens all the time, and I don't think I want to just normalize that for entrepreneurs, because I think what makes you entrepreneurial is you're constantly questioning things, right? You're constantly in a questioning mind frame. You're looking at this, you're looking at these things you're doing, you're constantly kind of judging them, right? And I think it's important to turn off the noise, to hit the mute button from time to time. But I think that's what makes entrepreneurs great, is they're always analyzing, they're always looking at what they're doing. And if you're not looking at what you're doing personally with your time and your energy and how you're spending it, you need to, because you maybe just be headed in a dark down path that's never going to go anywhere. And you don't want to blow 5 to 6 years of your life, right? Like time is our most valuable currency. And so I think it's important to have those. For me, I've gotten into a routine of like, I call my wife, I'm like, I don't call it at the time a powwow. But once I'm done, I'm like, that was a great powwow, and I'll just kind of get it all out, like question myself. Why am I doing this? Oh my God, I'm all these failures. And then the next morning, I would say to you, if you're not 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, full of, I call it P&V, piss and vinegar, and ready to go out and get after it again, then I would say start questioning. Because I can tell you 10 out of 10 times that I've ever had a powwow, the next day I'm refreshed and I'm ready to go kick ass again. And, I think that's kind of, everyone's got to have their own benchmark, but for me, that's the benchmark. And I would say, find that for you too, it's just like, are you ready to go the next day? Are you excited about it? Does it make your blood just boil, this idea or whatever it is that you're trying to build? And if it does, then, keep rocking. But if it's not, it's not that entrepreneur isn't in for everyone. It's just that sometimes it's not the right time, right? Or you don't have the right product or service, or you're a little bit far ahead of your time. And maybe you just need to take some time and recalculate, and I don't think that once you're on this journey, you have to be stuck to it. Some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world took a step back. They moved into a job. They did a W-2. People are doing it now during COVID, and so I like to give that kind of shout out to people that if you're having that mindset or you're questioning yourself, it's not an unhealthy thing to get out of it for a little while, because it is hard. I mean, it's unbelievably hard, and life certainly makes it even more difficult being an entrepreneur. But yeah, all the time, man, all the time.
Well, it's been an awesome podcast. We learned a lot. I have this book written down. Who? Do you know the author by any chance?
I'll shoot it to you after so you guys can share it in the podcast.
Absolutely.
Measure what matters, right? Measure what matters.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good one. I like that one.
So if our listeners wanted to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, you can go on our website. It's re-viv, R-E-V as in Victor, I-V as in Victor.com. That's, our private equity investment company. You can reach out to me directly. Go straight to my calendar. If you want to book an appointment, whatever, shoot me an email, talk about entrepreneurship, or 415-805-8933 is my direct line. So just give me a shout and shoot me a text.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and drop that into the show notes below. And it's been an awesome podcast episode here today. Looking forward to releasing it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, send us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.